All right, let's get this started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first video of a series that we're titling here Not So Traditional Grammar. Um, my name's Ross. I'm going to tell you a bit more about me in just a second here, but first I want to say something about this whole setup, what we're doing here, how this is going to work, and what you can expect from these videos. So, like I said, I gotta change over here. I'm still working on this technology and video recording, so bear with me. So yeah, like I said, my name is Ross Burkholder. I'm a professor at Calvin, and I'm a linguist. I study various aspects of language. In particular, in my own research, I'm interested in sociolinguistics and how language structures and people meet, and all the fun stuff that happens when they do, because it turns out they do that a lot. I was originally slated to be co-teaching this class with Professor Johnson, but you may have noticed you haven't seen me until this point. Well, that's because some certain things happened. In the meantime, my son decided to arrive a little bit early. Here he is. This is my new son, Ezra. So I'm at home instead hanging out with him, but I still am chipping in a little bit to participate in this last interim, the last hurrah of interim. So I'm happy to be joining you from home through this series of videos. A bit more about that. Like I said, this is not so traditional grammar, so the plan for what we're going to be doing is we're going to be highlighting a few various points through these hopefully short and sweet videos that highlight different facets of grammar, which we don't have as much time to get into in depth over the course of this interim, which are still very much related to grammar. Just maybe not the style of traditional grammar, which is the focus of this class. Yeah. The goal of sort of the whys behind what we're doing here are this. These little mini lectures, these videos that I'm recording should, if all goes well, accomplish two things. One, they should increase your breadth of knowledge about grammar. So it should increase the range of things that we're categorizing under grammar and tell you a little bit more about them and how they fit into this larger picture. That's actually going to be one of the main topics of today's little lecture once we hop into that. And number two, they're going to provide a useful backdrop that you can then compare the things that you're learning in this class, the more traditional grammar, against. They're going to provide that backdrop, a comparison point for the sort of traditional grammar that you guys have been learning up to this point. And you can see the shape of it, hopefully, a little bit more clearly in contrast with the types of things that I'm going to be talking about in these videos. You can see what this traditional grammar gets you and what it doesn't get you. And possibly, if it piques your interest, it could provide a few different pathways forward in your classes in what to take next. If you really like some of the sociolinguistics aspects that I'll be talking about down the road, you can take English 372 with me, sociolinguistics, or if you like some of the other things, there are various classes that you might be interested in. So it's a little bit of breadth and to serve as a comparison point. Sweet. Some of the topics that we're going to be talking about in this series of not so traditional grammar are things like this. Today we're going to start out talking about how traditional grammar lines up with modern linguistics. How those two, what the contrast there looks like, how they fit together and overlap in various ways or not. We're going to narrow that down next time, talking about traditional grammar as opposed to modern syntax, one very specific element of modern linguistics. So that's going to be, today is going to be a more abstract, big picture, bigger ideas type of video, and next time will be a little more nitty gritty, and we'll look at some of the ins and outs of a syntax, modern linguistic syntax system as opposed to the types of grammar you've been learning up to this point. After that, well, we'll see after that. There's a few different topics. I've got some ideas. We might talk about different types of grammars that different languages around the world use. We'll break out of our Anglo-centricity, at least for a moment, which is always a good thing to do, and see how other languages do things. See what the rules look like in other languages and how they're different from English. We might look at how language changes over time. If we have time for it, that's kind of the optional one. I'm leaving myself an out, being a new father here. We'll see how many I get to. And then lastly, we'll finish it up with a little bit of fun, and we'll look at grammar on the internet. And this will look at things like various memes and meme syntax, and a bunch of stuff like that. That's part of my research intersects with this last area of grammar in the internet, or language on the internet. That's what I do within sociolinguistics, is look at how groups on the internet communicate and use the different technological facets that are available to them to augment their communication, we could say it that way. So that gives you a little sneak peek of where we're going to be at over this next series of videos. I hope you'll find them enjoyable. I try to keep them a little bit light. This is not so traditional grammar, so we can be a little more realistic, perhaps. Maybe that's not the right characterization. You'll have to tell me later. So without further ado, that wraps up my little preamble here, and we're going to hop right into it with today's topic of traditional grammar versus modern linguistics. And we're going to start with this idea of, I'm covering things up. That'll likely happen at various points. Shrink myself. We're going to start with this topic, this notion, this idea, this word grammar. And what does that mean? Because I think it's actually a fairly nebulous target. And I think I actually just prefer, I don't really like this. I'm teaching it, or at least co-teaching in part in theory and spirit class called All About Grammar. And I don't even really like that concept so much. But I'll dive into why I don't like that as much as I could. And part of that is this nebulous definition. So we're gonna start here with our working definition and say that one portrayal of grammar is that it's a set of structural rules governing the composition of clauses, phrases, and words in a natural language. And I like this definition all right. If you Google grammar, this is probably gonna come up. So I didn't generate, this isn't super specific. This is just kind of a general conception of what grammar is when we're talking about it. And we can use this as a commonality, as a common point, because both traditional grammar and modern linguistics, they differ a lot in how they see grammar, but here is a shared place. This is our safe spot we can come back to when we're having heated battles about traditional grammar and modern linguistics. We can come back to this idea for what grammar is. If Professor Johnson gave you a different definition of grammar, she's right. Just listen to whatever she tells you. But for this mini lecture, keep this one in mind, because we're going to revisit it as we go. And so we're going to take this as our common ground, and we're going to launch off from there and see, now that things are diverging, in what ways are they diverging? And I'm going to suggest that they diverge in three ways. That they differ in scope, they differ in focus, and they differ in perspective. And by they here, I mean traditional grammar and modern linguistics differ in their conception of what grammar is in these three ways: scope, focus, and perspective. So we're going to talk about those. In terms of scope, not mouthwash or toothpaste or anything like that, we can think of, what does it cover? What's under the heading of grammar, right? What does that cover? And to do this, I looked at your syllabus, because I have access to that too. And I saw the types of things that you've been learning in this grammar class. And they're things like this. They're, hopefully, unless things have changed drastically, you've been learning things like parts of speech, transitive versus intransitive sentence, different constructions, different sentence or word constructions like gerunds and infinitives, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A bunch of different stuff like this. And if I were to summarize this set of information that you're learning in modern linguistics, this is called syntax, largely. You've largely been looking at rules for constructing things like sentences, or possibly paragraphs, or possibly words. Somewhere in that range of size, right? You've been learning at different ways to construct these utterances or sentences. And in modern linguistics, this study, I'm trying to shrink myself again, hold on. This study is called syntax. In addition, some of the things that you've been learning don't quite fit under this syntax heading, which is how to put together words to make sentences. You've also been doing a little bit of what in modern linguistics is called morphology. And morphology has to do with taking parts of creating words from word parts. A word part, a part of a word that has meaning. The smallest unit of meaning in language is called a morpheme. And when you combine those, you get words, and that has to do with their part of speech. So you've been doing a dash of morphology, and you've been doing a lot of syntax. And again, the contrast, the difference between these two concepts here, morphology and syntax, is the size of the unit. Morphology is talking about taking pieces of words and smashing them together to make words. And syntax is taking words as its base unit and smashing them together to make sentences. Hopefully, my characterization is correct. That you've been doing a lot of that, a lot of different types of constructions and sentences. But now that I've made this summary, let's review what grammar is. Let's go back to our shared ground to see if this is it. Is this the thing that we said grammar was? Or I can frame this a slightly different way. Sorry, I keep making myself various sizes here, but are these essentially the question I want to ask? Are these the rules? Are the things that you've been learning the only rules that govern the composition of clauses, phrases, and words in a natural language? And I hope, think about it for a second, I'll give you a little pause, a little break here. But I hope your answer is no, that this isn't it. This is certainly part of what we need to know. These are rules that we need to know that do indeed govern the composition of clauses, phrases, and words in a natural language. That's true. They meet that definition, but they're not the only thing that meets that definition. A quick side note on this little graphic that I have here, this handy-dandy house. I'm not exactly sure what it's trying to show me. It's showing you what's in there, but look at this house construction with this little syntax coming off the side. I don't know. Don't read too much into the actual architecture of this house. That's quite all right. What's inside it, that's important. Because what's inside it will show us something that traditional grammar leaves out. It shows you various aspects that all claim are part of grammar that aren't as covered by traditional notions of grammar. One of the things that's missing here, sort of a glaring one, we could say, is anything about sound production. How the sound systems of a language work. There are rules for how sound systems in a language work, to how you actually say these words. That's a rule-governed property of speaking English. It's not randomized, it's rule-governed. And therefore, it is part of, let me back this up, it is part of the structural rules governing the composition of clauses, phrases, and words in a natural language. It is a rule system that we need to produce English, at least in its spoken form. We'll talk about this difference between speaking and writing in just a moment. But hopefully you see that it qualifies. It qualifies, but we probably haven't talked much about sounds and sound systems in this class up to this point. We're going to ask ourselves, why not, right? Why is this? Why are these things missing? Before we get to that why question, though, we'll look at another area, at least one other area that's missing, and that's semantics. Semantics has to do with meanings. Meanings of words, meanings of phrases, meanings of utterances. And we haven't touched so much upon this in traditional grammar either. Again, this is rule governed. Think about this using some examples. I'm going to make some last minute addendums to our slide here, so hopefully this goes well. Here we go. So if I write a sentence like, I run to the store, I run to the store, we know what each of these words means individually. We know what running is, we know what the store is, we know what this pronoun I is a reference to the speaker here. We know what all these things mean individually, but within the realm of semantics, what we get is a rule system that allows us to take these individual word meanings and create out of them something, a larger order of meaning, what this sentence means. And it involves these pieces. It involves I, me, it involves running, and it involves a store and a directionality, me going to that store. So we take all those pieces of meaning, encapsulated in all those words, and out of them, we have a rule system which creates a larger order meaning, that of the meaning of the sentence, that is. So it's a rule system which is used to construct blah, 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 right? Whatever else it is in our silly definition of grammar. Only slightly dismissive here. We need that too. That's part of this rule system, but it's not typically one that traditional grammar classes or teachings of grammar are going to cover. There are other ones as well. This is where we get into some of the nebulousness of grammar and what people include. Certainly within modern linguistics, both phonology and semantics are included there. And then we get into some gray area where things like phonetics and pragmatics are two other realms of linguistics that variously get either categorized as being part of grammar or not. Phonetics has to do, again, with actual sound production, not the rule system. And pragmatics has to do with sort of practical applications of these semantic uses in context. 4 more on those. 4 more on any of these subjects, I point you to English 370 Linguistics, where we talk about all these different subfields in greater depth. Here I'm touching upon them not to teach you about them, but to sort of point you in the direction of what's being omitted in traditional grammar. That arguably is still part of grammar. Hopefully that makes sense. If not, I'm going to have a question session at some point, or at least some office hours. I'll have a way you can get at me here. Professor Johnson and I will decide that a little bit later and let you know. Phew! Okay. We're going to take 2 quick sidebars here. The first sidebar that we're going to take is this one. A question you may be asking yourself. If you're not asking yourself this question, that's totally fine, but a hypothetical thought that you could be having that I want to address right now is this. You might be asking yourself, okay, if we include the syntax, the structure of sentences, morphology, the structure of words, phonology, the sound systems of a language, and semantics, the meaning systems of a language, and those are all under grammar, isn't that like everything, basically? Isn't that just like all the things of a language? And I'm glad you asked that. Good job. Nice question there, if you were indeed thinking that. I'll give you credit for that one regardless. I can't tell. I'm just a video. It's not. There's more to language and linguistics than these areas that we've been putting under grammar. So for instance, one of the things that isn't under grammar that is very much a part of language is what's called the lexicon. The lexicon. And the lexicon you can think of as a dictionary. It's a mental dictionary. It's not the physical book that you open, but it's essentially the mental version of that. It's a list in this conception of different words and some information about those words, at least including their meaning. So it's we can think of it like we think of a dictionary, right? So we're like bear, and then it's a large fuzzy animal you should be scared of. It's not a very good bear definition, but regardless, within your lexicon you have this word form over here, the actual bear, and then you have some information about what it means to be a bear. And possibly you have additional information in there as well, like this, that it's a noun. Parts of speech, like you talked about before. And this isn't part of grammar, interestingly. It's definitely a part of language, right? This is things you need to know, but it's not a rule system. Again, we come back to our definition. Let me find it. It's the set of structural rules governing the composition of clauses, phrase, and words in natural language. And this, the lexicon, is not a rule system. it's essentially, it's not static knowledge because you can update this with more information if you need it, right? And it's like, I don't know. What else do you need to know about bears? They eat fish and hibernate? Okay, clearly I'm not a ursologist. I don't know. Clearly I don't know much about bears. That's immaterial at the moment. You can add on to these things as you want. So they're not static, but they're not a rule system. They're the building blocks that the rules of syntax and morphology then take. They take these words out of your mental lexicon and put them together in a rule-governed way. These are just flat. A lexicon like this is just flat. It's not a system of rules. Important for the language, but not part of grammar. Not a system of rules in the same way that syntax or phonology or semantics or morphology are. So hopefully that clarifies something about, again, thinking about these videos and telling us what grammar is in contrast. Hopefully that tells us something about what grammar is. It's these rule systems. It's not the knowledge like this. Other things that are part of language but aren't part of grammar, well, there's a lot of them, right? We can think of historical linguistics and the language change over time from these ancient languages like Proto-Indo-European 6,000 years ago and how English got here, or even the evolution from Old English through Middle English to modern English. That's part of language. It's very much studying language in anybody's conception, but it's not a rule system that speakers right now need to know to construct something in modern language. No, we don't need to know the historical origins of these things in order to be able to say anything about them or to use the language now. That would be a cool world to live in, but not a very practical one, I suppose. And similarly, things like psycholinguistics, what's going on with language in various brain centers and cognitive processes, and even sociolinguistics, which is how people actually use the language and the connotations they have with various words, getting maybe a little bit more rule governed there, but still outside of these conceptions of what grammar is. So there's a lot more to linguistics other than just grammar. That's the take-home point. Listen in here. There's a lot within this conception of grammar, but it's not everything within linguistics. Linguistics is not synonymous with grammar in that sense. Phew. Okay. So we covered then our first point. That's the one I was going to focus on the most. The other two I'm going to go over more briefly. One builds out of this notion and the other one you've already covered. So this is the bulk. Hang tough. If you're still here, great. You can always pause this video and watch the rest later. If you miss anything, come back and watch it later. This is a good point to pick it up right here. In talking about this next difference, which is a difference of focus, I want you to think about some of the aspects we've already talked about in this video. Traditional grammar is focused with very narrowly focused on things like syntax and morphology, leaving something out. That's what we just talked about. And what I want you to think about is why. Why is traditional grammar so picky? Okay, I know the answer is already on the slide. I'm not good at making slides. But think about that, right? Why? What is the reason for leaving stuff like phonology and semantics out? I'm going to posit to you that the reason for this omission within traditional grammar is a difference in focus, and that traditional grammar is focused on written language, largely, as opposed to spoken language or signed language. And when you're focusing on written language, that is, well, then we can see kind of naturally why phonology is not stressed as much. Who needs to talk about sound systems when we're focused on writing? It's true. I mean, it's a real point and makes sense from a certain perspective why traditional grammar has not focused as much on phonology. With its focus on written language, phonology takes a back seat. So we see the mission of phonology clicking out of this focus on writing. Clicking's not the right word there, but Hopefully you'll get what I'm saying. And so what about semantics? Why is semantics largely left out of traditional conceptions of grammar as it's taught? And here I'm going to posit a different origin, a different explanation for this omission, and I'm going to posit that traditional grammar assumes a baseline level of proficiency in the language that it's talking about. Traditional grammar it doesn't want to bring you from nothing to something in terms of language proficiency. And I'm going to talk about this in a bit, but we can see that in this class, right? This class that you're taking, English 374, it too assumes a baseline level of proficiency. In fact, English is required to take this class. Some level of English proficiency is required to take this class because it's taught in English. It wouldn't be very helpful otherwise. So what traditional grammar is trying to do is to take you from some proficiency to what it sees as improvement. We'll talk about that. That's dangerous. But what it sees as improved language proficiency. So it doesn't start from nothing. It starts from proficiency and gets you higher. Where grammar in a modern linguistic sense wants to build things up from the bottom. And so you need to talk about semantics and what the words mean and what the sentences mean, because we don't assume that the people reading or learning from this grammar, benefiting from this grammar, have that knowledge already in the way that traditional grammar does assume that. It's a lot of information coming at you quickly, so again, feel free to pause whenever. And I already hinted at this, but I'll state it more explicitly. This focus of traditional grammar on written language is opposed by the focus of modern linguistics, which is very much the opposite. Modern linguistics focuses heavily on spoken and signed language and not as much on written language. Why is that the case? Always these why questions. They're great ones to ask. Modern linguistics focuses on signed and spoken language because spoken and signed language is seen as primary. Illustrated a little bit in the following scenario, right? Of the, who knows how many languages, say 7,000, 8,000 languages found on Earth currently, many of them don't have a written language system. It's clearly not necessary for a spoken, signed language to have a written form. This shows us the beginnings. We'd have to talk about this in more depth if I wanted to drive this home, but this gets us a glimpse of the primariness, it's got to be a better way to say that, of spoken and signed language as opposed to written language. Written language within modern linguistics is seen as a technology which uses and is built upon language. Certainly, language is necessary for writing to come about, to exist, to do its thing, but it's secondary. It's built upon the system of language. It's not the thing itself. So it's not focused. So there's a distinct difference in what these two conceptions of grammar are focused on. Traditional grammar focused on writing, modern linguistics focused not on writing, but on spoken or signed languages. I'm putting those in the same category, spoken or signed languages, by the way, because they are in the same category. Sometimes, like here in this slide, I just wrote spoken and left out signed. Apologies on that. I should add that back in there. Spoken and signed languages are spoken as opposed to signed languages are just two different modalities of expressing language. Whether you're doing that through an auditory vocal tract, or whether you're doing that through the visual and seeing tract in sign languages, there are some interesting differences there, but they're of the same type. They're all natural languages. Sign languages are also natural languages and should be included in that group. Another thing we can talk about more if you're interested. Awesome. Okay, I'm finishing up here. We're on the home stretch, team. Because I'm not going to talk about this overly much. The last difference between traditional grammar and modern linguistics is this difference in what did I call it? Perspective, I think, which is prescriptivism versus descriptivism. And the reason I'm not going to harp on this is because I know you've already talked about this. Professor Johnson has already talked to you about this in class. But I do want to at least take what you've heard about that and place it in context here. That is another one of the differences between these two different sort of conceptions or fields, uses of grammar. Descriptivism, again, super quick review, is it's describing how people actually use language, right? It's describing actual language behaviors. You're describing things. And prescriptivism is telling people how they should speak. This is a kind of a quick and dirty definition for these things, but it gets us on the same page. A quick refresher. And so where, descriptivists have found things like all natural languages and dialects are equally suited to their purpose, whether that be communication or otherwise, prescriptivists, on the other hand, place moral judgments on language behaviors, or even whole languages, and that are not factually based. These are stereotypes, they're perceptions of these different languages or dialects or constructions or whatever they're about. And it places moral judgments in the sense of this is the way it should be, this is how to do it correctly, and if you're not doing it that way, the implication, explicit or implicit, is that you're doing it wrong, that's worse. That better and worse, this is a better way to do it and a worse way to do it, ties it into moral judgments. And I'm not gonna, I would love to talk about this in more depth. It's something that I get fired up about, particularly in educational contexts, but I'm going to leave that sit for now. And I've already kind of hit my time here. I'm shooting for half an hour-ish. Sometimes these may go a little bit long. So I'm going to cap it off here with these three differences. So to recap again, what we've seen here is a shared starting point for grammar, with grammar being, oops, that's not the slide I wanted, apologies. Grammar being a set of structural rules being an important word here, governing the composition of clauses, phrases, and words in a natural language. And we've highlighted three different ways in which traditional grammar differs from modern linguistics' conception of grammar. That's in scope, what's included, that's in focus, writing versus speaking, and that's in this differences between prescriptivism and descriptivism, which you've already heard about up to this point. So that's it from me for today. We've started our journey into not so traditional grammar. So this is our launching point. My sincere hope is that this is the most boring of the videos I bring to you. We'll get into some more fun stuff later, including getting into differences between traditional grammar and modern syntax in your next video. That's where I'm headed. That one might be a little bit shorter because I don't want to get too bogged down, but we will look at some specific examples there, and then we'll look at some other topics in the future videos. So that's it from me. I hope you enjoyed some not so traditional grammar, and tune in next time for more of the same. I hope you guys are enjoying your interim and staying safe and warm as best you can. Have a good one.